Hello and welcome to Celebration. I'm your host, Charlotte Neild, and welcome to another episode. I have a very special friend who's here to share a very rare and very unique talent with us today, a definite celebration of musical life. So sit back with me, watch for a moment. I have a clip to show you, and you'll see exactly who I'm talking about.
Can we do it again just a bit louder this time? Let me hear you now. Everybody, come on. You make me happy. How about you clap along as well? Big finish now.
Please join and celebrate with me my friend, the velvet piano player, Jon England. Welcome, Jon.
Hello, Charlotte.
How are you?
Well, thank you. Lovely to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here.
Well, thank you.
Tell me, let's go back to the beginning. There's so much to learn. Whereabouts in England did you grow up?
It's an area called the West Country. The county is specifically Dorset, which is where the most beautiful Jane Austen and Thomas Hardy films are made. So I grew up, metaphorically speaking, in the 1930s, right on farmland, right on the coast of England. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Beautiful place.
Absolutely. An only child?
No, I had a sister. Well, I have a sister. I've been here in America for long enough to almost think that that's a past incident, but no, I have a sister. We grew up alternately loving and loathing each other, but we played on the beach and in the cliffs around and in the yard and played music in the house and did all sorts of stuff like that. So,
oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
And what did Mom and Dad do?
Well, Dad was a sales and marketing man all his life, and Mum grew up in the era where she looked after the family. So
those are wonderful days.
Absolutely, yes.
You were kind enough to bring some footage with you and some pictures with you, and I'd love to show the audience. How old are you there?
I would say I'm probably about 11, something like that. I remember at the beginning of, it would be called senior school over there, from 11 to 17, we were all lined up like little soldiers and our mug shots taken. So I would say probably about 10 or 11, something like that.
So school was formal, ties and
Absolutely.
Jackets.
Yep.
And how lovely. No jeans and sweatshirts.
Absolutely not, no. And plenty of visits to the headmaster's office for me, I'm afraid.
Oh, you were a devil, were you?
Well, I didn't take particularly well to the formal side of things. I was too busy having a good time.
Oh, I understand that. You still do.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go.
Sure.
And now how about our second picture at the piano?
Well, that was a picture taken, I believe, shortly before I got my first professional job. All of it happened in a really concentrated time period. So I discovered I could play the piano when I was about sort of 16, just at the end of school time. And by the beginning of the following year, my father asked the usual dad's question, well, what the devil are you going to do? And so I started to make inroads into the music, and the local newspaper came and took a formal picture of a barely smiling young man at the beginning of his musical career. That was at the house. We actually had 3 pianos in the house.
You did.
Yeah.
So your parents are musical?
Well, yes, not formally or in a big way, but they loved music. The house was always full of music. All sorts of easy listening stuff was always on the radio in the morning before we went to school, and in the evening when we came home. Television wasn't anything like as big a thing.
Exactly.
So there was always music playing.
Wonderful. And the final picture down below?
Well, that's when I realized that music was as good a chick magnet as being a sportsman.
You're a devil.
And as I wasn't any good at sports, I stuck to the music, and that's how that came about. But,
wonderful.
And you see, it works.
Of course, of course. Gather round.
Absolutely.
Yes, indeed. Now, all right, tell me about this rare talent that you have. You have this ability to play so beautifully and in all genres. How did you know, when did you realize that you had this given gift?
Well, it sounds like a made-up story, but in the early 1970s, the big film was The Sting with Robert Redford and Paul Newman. Marvin Hamlish reinvigorated all the Joplin music, the Scott Joplin music. And my father was he was as much a wannabe musician, a wonderful man, but he, in the Harry James days after the Second World War, he bought a trumpet and thought that by having a trumpet he would be able to play it. And then there was a banjo star in the 1930s as well, so he bought a banjo with which he wooed my mother. And he wasn't particularly brilliant, but he was very enthusiastic at all of them. So he bought the piano for the house. And as I say, in the 70s, this film came along with the music that was on wall to wall on the radio. And I guess it must have been going into my psyche, because in those days, when your parents told you to go to bed, you went to bed. Mm-hmm. So at about 9 o'clock one evening, I went to bed up the other end of our house, and I could hear this distant muffled playing of the entertainer Rag. And he was trying to figure out on the piano, because he wasn't a reader either, how to do the end of this piece of music. And after about an hour of tossing and turning in bed, I got up, apparently. I was told that I got up, sort of slept, walked down the other end of the house, went into the living room where he was, pushed him aside gently and said, look, this is how it goes. And I just started to play it.
Oh my gosh.
And then partly in sleep after I'd finished, I turned around, walked away and went to bed. And the next day, the dad said, well, can you do that again? And then I did, and I started to play a few other pieces, and it just literally came overnight like that.
Now, do you hear it and it transforms into your hands to play? Or?
Yes, yeah. And I think it was possibly because music was on all the time in the house, before we went to school, when we came home, in the evening. So perhaps my brain that wouldn't respond to formal education was sort of sucking all this stuff up, and I didn't know it.
Indeed, indeed. So tell me about your first jobs.
Well, they came about, actually my sister has been a great provider of the leads that have led to some pretty exciting stuff for me. As much as I love the piano, really the first start was the drums, which was many years previous. As a kid, I would rattle and bang on everything, much to my mother's annoyance. And then, of course, I wanted to be a rock drummer in a group band like the Beatles, which didn't come off because my father said, you know, there's millions of drummers, you want to play something more interesting. So I took up playing the banjo with him. We used to play at parties and family gatherings and things like that. And then I realized there was an instrument with more strings on it than the banjo, which was the guitar. So I rather liked the sound of that, and eventually I was given one of those for a Christmas present, even though I hadn't asked for it. I'd asked for a drum kit. You know how it is.
Of course.
And then I found I was quite proficient on the guitar. And then I realized that music was actually transferable between instruments, which I guess if I'd attended music class at school I would have found out more formally, but I just had to find out indirectly. And I found out that something that you might play on the guitar could also be transferred to the piano. So after a while, I would sit with the guitar and play the stuff that I was good at and work out what the notes were on the piano. And I'd hold the guitar on my knee, play it, and then find out on the piano what it was, and then realize that, wow, there's a whole encyclopedia of music. You know, a chord that fits this tune also fits that tune, and this pattern fits that, and so on and so forth. So, and then I started listening to more and more of a wider range of music and realized that the piano had much greater expression for me, and it had all the notes that were ever there. It's kind of the mother instrument.
Indeed.
So that's kind of how it. Anyway, you asked me about some of the jobs I did.
Yes.
So the first one was my sister gave us a call. She had married and moved away, but she gave a call and said, in the newspaper there's a job for a personality pianist at a nightclub, which, living quite out in the sticks, was pretty rare. But it was two chaps down from London decided to set up this restaurant and fancy place, bought a beautiful grand piano and advertised for this personality pianist. Well, I played the guitar, but my sister didn't think that would be a problem. She said, well, why not ring them up and pretend that you're fully professional, you can do this. And I said, yes, but I'm a guitarist, not a piano player. She said, well, just talk them into it. Well, I was nervous still. I was at the age where you didn't make phone calls, you didn't have a cell phone and this sort of thing. So I spoke to my father. He said, well, I'll handle it. And we sounded exactly alike on the phone. So he called them up, pretending to be me. And of course, he was a practiced professional at all sorts of sales techniques. And said, well, I'm frightfully busy for the next few weeks, you see, but I can come and play for you in a couple of weeks' time. And I'm in the hallway gesticulating madly, saying, no, I'm the guitar, mention the guitar. And he finished the phone call, put it down. I was hopping. I said, what am I going to do? He said, you're going to learn the piano properly.
Oh my.
You need about an hour's material to get this audition. Of course, I blanched and thought, what the devil do I do? Well, he got out 3 records, a Liberace record, a Fat Swallow record, and a Carmen Cavallero record, set up the player on the piano, on the baby grand. He said, now you listen to that day in and day out and copy each phrase bit by bit. He said, I've heard you play the other stuff, now do something serious.
Wow.
And within about a week, I had 45 minutes, and within about 10 days, I had an hour. And he called back, or rather, I called back with his voice, set up the time, went and got the first job.
Unbelievable. And how did you get your Liberace flair? Is that something that just comes naturally to you as a performer?
I guess it does. I mean, those are the records I listened to. Liberace was all over the keyboard, so would Carmen Cavallero, and Fat Swallow was he was the impressionist painter of piano playing, just all over the jolly keyboard. So that's what I listened to, and that's what my first few bits, I copied it, and then it became a style. And
oh, my.
it sounds like a silly story, but that's how,
No,
that's how it
doesn't.
actually happened.
It's actually fascinating, and I'm trying to wrap my mind around being able to listen to something and sit and play it. I just can't get there. You know, I don't have that lean towards musicality.
Well, when people first heard me, they would say, "Well, this really is a gift, isn't it?" And I thought gift was rather almost a sacred word to use, and I didn't want to claim it for myself. But I guess the older I get, the more I realize it was whoever controls the planet looked down at me and said, "If he's that useless at school, we better give him something else."
Point him in the right direction.
That's right. Keep him out of trouble, and it came fairly naturally.
Oh, that's too much. Now. Were you already doing the cruise lines? I'm leading up to your meeting your lovely wife.
Right.
So start me off
Okay.
and coming to America and oh.
Well, that first little job lasted for about 18 months, and the chaps moved back up to London. It hadn't been a success. It was a little too in advance of its time. They'd actually had businesses in the south of France where the deal is you have a baby grand piano in a place, and you put a top on it with wine bottles and instruments and what have you, and people crowd around, and a bit like the pub sing-alongs of England, this was more the continental flavour. And it was a little too ahead of its time, it being in a rural area. It was a beautiful 15th century manor house, but as I say, a little too much. So they moved back, and I needed to look for the next opportunity. And my father had always been aware that there are cruise vessels that travel the world. And in 1967, this was before there was any inkling of the music, the QE2, the Queen Elizabeth II liner, was launched. Came on the news that it was going to be floating down the Channel from Southampton to Cornwall, and then on its maiden voyage to America. And anybody who wanted to see it was to get out on the south coast and to look to the Channel, because it would never sail that close to the shore again. It was taking a bit of a risk, but they wanted everybody to see it. We lived right on the coast. So we were out on one summer afternoon, and this is years before I had any musical idea, and this beautiful ship, it was, Concorde was done in the late 60s and 70s. It was a unique design, one-off ship. And this massive thing darkened the horizon, and we watched it go by beautifully. And my father said, without any guile, no side, he said, wouldn't it be incredible to travel the world on a vessel like that? With no, I was still playing soccer in the yard as a little kid. And then later on, that was exactly the ship on which I got my first break.
Amazing.
Because he foresaw that this nightclub thing might not work and started to say, well, let's record what you do, and then we'll promote it to various places. So we did. We found out the agent responsible for the QE2 cruise liner and sent the material off, and within a week I got a call, strangest call. There had been a celebrity chap of the size and fame of Floyd Kramer or somebody like that in America, but he was in England, and he wasn't doing so well, but they had put him on this cruise line to play around the world it was a 3-month cruise, and he dropped dead.
Oh my God.
Yes, he was an older gentleman, fond of a drop. Hadn't always looked after himself, but he was playing happily, and then one night he just didn't wake up the next morning. They called the agent in London and said, get whoever you can. So I got a call, or rather my father got the call. He pretended to be me.
We're doing this again.
Because I still wasn't very good at this. And he said, yes, when would this be? And the chap said, tomorrow. So I said, yes, absolutely. Came off the phone. We started to pack straight away. My mother put a whole stack of clothes in and bits and pieces, and off I went. I flew to Naples, joined the ship. This thing darkens the sky. It was so huge. And there I am at 19 thinking, what the devil am I doing? But I went on, and I watched Vic Damone and Bill Cosby, Al Jarreau, great names do their fantastic shows while I was playing in the cocktail lounge at 19.
Oh. What an experience.
Incredible. Absolutely
Amazing.
fabulous.
Now, how long did you stay with the cruise line? Was that a continuing job for you?
No. I was so sick. I lost nearly 20 pounds in about 2 weeks. It came up from Naples through the Mediterranean, the Bay of Biscay, and across to New York. And I couldn't hold breakfast down. It was terrible.
Oh, dear.
It was April, so it was still the end of the winter, the beginning of the spring.
Indeed.
And it was, but so I cabled my father, get me off this thing, I'm going to die. And I'd never been seasick in my life. I'd spent my youth in a boat with my father on the shore, and no trouble. But this huge thing was it would go up and down 50 feet at a time. Oh. And of course, when I was playing, I was okay, because I had something to concentrate on. I could also jam my knees under the piano. Which was bolted to absolutely. But But anyway, so I kept, get me off this thing, and he wrote back and said, "Are you sure this is a chance of a life?" I said, "Yes, please get me off." But by the time we reached New York, it was nice and calm, and the next 3 weeks were in the Caribbean, and there were various bronzed young ladies walking around the deck, and suddenly life looked absolutely fine.
Big turnaround.
Indeed. But by which time the agent had found a replacement. So I had about, I suppose, 6 or 8 weeks, and then I didn't cruise for quite some years after that.
And what did you do?
Well, I developed my land-based playing, nightclubs
Okay.
and theatres, and my father and I went to the south of France. We came to America in the late 70s together to discover things, and I made some recordings, so I was keeping on going, but the ships I kept at bay for a while.
Well, now, let's talk about Margaret.
Indeed.
Who am I? Oh, who I would love to meet sometime.
Of course.
You met Margaret on a cruise,
I did.
and
Yes.
you were down in the Mediterranean. Is that right?
Yes, she had. She was in the audience, and I had been recruited to play for about 5 weeks, doing a headline show on the big stage this time. And she was in the audience with her mother, who had brought her on as a guest. And they saw my show, and dare I say, the rest is history.
Oh my goodness!
No, we were actually.
wonderful.
It gets even better. As a guest entertainer, you're flown out to a ship. You do a show for 45 minutes, and then maybe later in the week you do another show. But in the meantime, you're supposed to socialise with guests, and that's great fun to do so. So the maitre d' of the restaurant, I would turn up for dinner, and he would say, "Where would you want to sit?" And I said, "Well, anywhere where the pretty ladies are." So this chap took me over to the table where she was sitting with her mother, and her mother had befriended another lady who was travelling alone. So they hit it off like a house on fire, and so did Margaret and I.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, we've hit it off pretty well.
For
so,
sure.
yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And the final picture that we saw, that was your wedding day.
How did you guess?
Oh my goodness.
Yes, absolutely.
I know you brought a lovely picture of your darling. There she is.
Yes.
Now tell me, what age was she?
4 or 5 years old at that time.
Is she performing?
Actually, she's developed into quite a dancer since then. But yes, those were her early fairy princess days. I would say probably a year and a half later from that.
Now I know I want to talk to you about composing.
Right.
Because once again, you know, my non-musical brain does not grasp that you don't read music, but you not only play beautifully, but you also compose.
Right.
Now, I read, of course, on your website, which is wonderfully informative,
Thank you.
that you were, of course, longing for your family. You were back out cruising, and that you had composed this lovely lullaby for your daughter.
That's right.
And you were nice enough to bring some footage along for us. with
Yes, that's
that.
right,
I'd
yes.
love to have the audience share that with us, if you don't
Sure,
mind.
absolutely, my
We'll go to
pleasure.
that clip, okay? Wasn't that amazing and so lovely? Thank you for sharing that, Jon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
What is it like for an audience to hear that? Because I know you perform in such large venues, and you share this very intimate, very personal time with them. I bet you can hear a bit of sniffling and weeping going on, because it was just beautiful.
Well, it seems a bit manipulative, but I'm so proud of her, and I can't take her with me in my suitcase when I travel. So it's my way of saying, well, you know, there's more to me than just the music or the big show business personality. And there's a little bit of it, if I have enough time. Just the story of that piece is that way back while I was still in England, before I'd even met Margaret, I woke up one day, a bit like Paul McCartney did with the tune Yesterday.
Yes.
And that piece was fully formed in my mind. And I don't compose a great deal. I've only ever made up about a dozen pieces. And I went to the piano, switched the tape recorder on, and played it just like you heard it, all the way through with the beginning, middle, and end, the whole thing. Never hesitated for a second. And I was glad I did, because I don't think I could have repeated it exactly as it was unless I'd got the recording. And then many years later, Margaret was expecting, and she said, you know, all your crash bang wallop stuff is wonderful, but can you play me just some relaxing stuff? Just, she was on the sofa and she was approaching the time. So I played through half a dozen melodies, just the softer music. And then I played that one. And I suddenly thought, now I know why I was given that piece in my sleep, or whatever it was. And she said, I love that. What is that? And I said, I just wrote it. And she said, no. And I said, yes. Actually, I said, I wrote it about 12 years ago, before I even met you. But now I realise, well, and I thought, well, that was fate. Oh. And so, of course, like every dad, I was filming every minute of her life and put it together. So then I collated it and share it with the audience. It's a little down, quiet, intimate moment in a show that's different to all the flamboyant stuff.
It is, yeah. And it shows the inner part of you, yeah, which we like.
Very nice.
Now, I know you brought your guitar with you. We haven't even had a chance to touch on that, but
I know.
We're going to do that, because I'm going to ask you to come back. Would you do that for me?
I would love to. It would be really great. It's been smashing talking with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bless you.
And bless you, my friend. Thank you so much for being with us. I can't tell you how pleased I am that Jon's going to come back. But until I see you again, until we meet up with Jon again, please remember, always and every day, to celebrate something or someone in your life. Thanks for being with us, folks. We'll see you next time.